I also have the privilege tonight of introducing our program. I am one of those people who still enjoy reading the newspaper the old-fashioned way. I like to hold a hard copy in my hands, and I read it from the front page right until the very last page. Of course, then it's time for the crossword puzzle. But one of the things I always take great interest in looking at is the My View column. And Greg Stamm's piece last October really hit home to me. Having attended the Newman Center since 1995, and having lived through the chapel, the student union, and my very favorite place of all time, the tent, and now on to this fine facility, this great hall. I know a building alone is not what faith and worship is all about. And tonight, we have our own prominent young pastor in Father Dan, our own localized version of Pope Francis and Father Pat, along with Greg Stamm, a respected member of the legal community and a longtime parishioner of the Newman Center. It's Greg's thoughtful treatise on the problems facing today's church that has kind of brought us here tonight. And it's now time to hear from our own three wise men. We have our own magi. Gentlemen, take it away.
How many people have actually read the My View column that was in October's newspaper? Good, then I feel better that you're familiar with how this all came about. Actually, when I wrote it, I wasn't expecting a response from the number of people who did respond. It's amazing how when you write an opinion piece, people view it differently because they have their own opinion about what you're writing. And some people thought I was advocating the closing of church buildings and creating a different kind of Catholic church. Other people said, oh, right on, it's about time somebody spoke up. And none of that was why I did it. Come on, grab a seat, guys. I'm gonna stand because I just got off an airplane. I've been away for 20 days and we flew home for the last 12 hours. And so if I sit, I might never get back up. Anyway, I'm no dummy though. I was a trial lawyer and I know enough to have a jury that's going to be respected. And so when somebody said, do you want to speak about the future of the Catholic Church? I'm thinking, me? I said, I better get some people here who know what they're talking about. And also, make sure that there's people in attendance because they weren't going to come out the Thursday before Christmas to hear me talk. So I hoodwinked my friend Dan and Pat into joining me today. You know, there's a few things I wanted to say about My View for getting this piece. I've written, I think, 4 different times over the last 20 years to My View. The very first time was, and we're all old enough, except for the few students here, to remember when they used to call Buffalo the armpit of the East. And all they used to do was talk about how it snowed in July. And it really annoyed me because I came up from New York and made Buffalo my home. So I wrote, my very first piece was talking about the people who companies sent to Buffalo. And the families came in screaming, what are we going to Buffalo for? And then when the company transferred them out of Buffalo, none of them wanted to leave because they fell in love with Buffalo just like I did and many of you did. So I wrote a piece that was, Buffalo, it's our little secret, let's keep it that way. And then a couple of years ago, you may have remembered, I wrote a piece saying I was a disgruntled Buffalo Bills fan. They were doing so well that they were putting them on night television almost every week. I go to bed at 7 o'clock at night. So I like the day games a lot better because when I was a kid in New York, the World Series was always played during the day. They didn't have night games. So that's where that came from. So this piece, I woke up at 4 o'clock one morning and I was thinking, I do not like what I've been reading in the newspaper about the Catholic Church. I don't like what I'm hearing on TV or on the radio about the Catholic Church. And I understood why. Newspapers do not sell by people's good deeds being on page one. Newspapers sell because things bad are happening. And I don't have to go into the details, you all know what I'm talking about. They'd much rather talk about crime and scandal and, sadly, some of the things that have happened to our church. So I was a little upset and I said, you know, I got to do something about that. And then I started realizing now they're talking about the people who are moaning and groaning about the realities of what we're facing. As Dan knows, there are fewer priests, and as Pat knows, when he and Roy became priests, there were 600 diocesan priests and over 500 religious order priests just serving the Buffalo Diocese. So there right there is 1,100 priests. Now, unless I'm mistaken, we're barely over 100 diocesan priests, and the number's shrinking because of age. And on top of that, the religious order priests are down to, somebody told me, 50. So how do you service 200 and some churches with 100 and some priests? You just can't do it. And so the inevitability is we have to be realistic about our future. We have to start to consolidate. Sadly, some of the decisions that are made are not decisions I would make, but they don't ask my opinion. You know, why would you want to close a church that has a thriving school? That makes no sense. But on the other hand, you understand that there is a time and a place for consolidation, particularly since he can't be in 10 places at the same time.
I've tried.
And you will continue to try. So, with that in mind, I thought, let's think about the days when Jesus was walking the earth. And that's kind of what prompted me to write the piece the way I wrote it. I'm not the most religious guy in the world, and those of you who know me well know I'm anything but a scholar in theology. But I do have a saying that was taught to me when I was young. If you're uncertain about what to do next, why don't you ask yourself, what would Jesus do in the same situation? And I hear that come out of your mouth. I've heard it come out of your mouth so many times. Father Roy says it so well. What would Jesus do? And I look around the room and I look at people who've been doing what Jesus would want them to do. We have women who go to the prison. We have a gentleman who does sleep in heavenly peace and builds beds for the homeless. We have people who deliver food. We have people who do so much. And it's not just students. This isn't just about campus ministry, because unless I'm mistaken, most of us are beyond school years. There's a few in the back who are students, but most of us are beyond school years. And Dan, what you have here, and besides what's here, a whole group of people who are the true Catholics, and they are the ones that leave this building and they do good deeds every day of the week. And they're helping people who need their help. And so I also talked about mistakes that have been made. And they're historical mistakes. They weren't mistakes at the time. And I'll give you a couple of secular examples. The reason we can't develop the outer harbor in Buffalo was because 125 years ago, when the political people of the time wanted to reclaim land for downtown and South Buffalo, it became our garbage dump. It made sense at the time. It took Lake Erie that was wandering closer and made it land. Well, now we can't develop it. Well, who knew 125 years ago? The same is true with the train. If you go back to the very early 1970s, Buffalo was either going to get from Congress money to build a dam. Well, we didn't need a dam. So what Jack Kemp and others did was, well, let's not just let the money go somewhere else. So they built a subway system that cost a lot of money, that never panned out to what they really needed it to be. So there's so many examples of that. And I look at the churches, not only here in Buffalo, around the world. If you've traveled to Europe, there's some magnificent churches. I see all the stained glass. I see the marble. I see golden chandeliers. And I think, boy, a lot of money went into those places. When Jesus was walking the earth, he was preaching on hillsides and in valleys and in fields. They didn't have buildings. And they didn't have priests. They had him. And he, until he ordained his apostles, he was the only game in town. He did a pretty good job, I think, because 2,000 plus years later, that's a life that we still serve, because forgetting all the stories, including the Gospels, excuse me, I also don't want to commit heresy. That's why I have my priest to correct me. Some of those stories are a little hard to comprehend, but what's not hard to comprehend are a couple of see, I grew up in a Catholic school where the catechism taught me what not to do. What's a sin? Don't do this. Do not commit this. Do not commit that. That's not the way I want to live my life. The way I want to live my life is what would Jesus do? So two things from the things I've read stand out. One, when you came to visit me in prison, when you came to feed me when I was hungry, when you clothed me when I was naked. Well, we didn't do that, Jesus. Every time you did it for another person, you did it for me. That stands out. The Beatitudes, doing good for people. And that's, to me, why the future of the Catholic Church is the same as the past of the Catholic Church. It's never going to change. It's the mission that has lasted for all these years, that's going to last long after we're all gone. So I'm not worried about the future of the Catholic Church. What I'm worried about is people getting caught up in the minutia. Look at this beautiful building. No stained glass, no marble altar, no gold chandeliers. The most utilitarian building I've been in a long time. It serves as a ministry center. It serves as a church. It serves as a place of worship. What more could we want? And it's going to survive for the longest time. So I think you know where now my article was coming from. My article was, wake up and just hang on the few words that Jesus wanted us to hang on. Do what I would do is what he would say to us. So let's talk about, again, we're not the students, and yet this is about campus ministry. Well, we are all part of campus ministry, regardless of whether you're my age or younger. This is what the future is. And we didn't get here by accident, and that's why I asked Pat to talk about how we got to where we are, and why I want Ann to talk about where we're going forward. 36 family number was an afterthought. I think you know that. They were going to stop at 35 families. Jack and Pat went to the bishop and said, I think you're missing the boat here. We've got all these students at UB downtown, at Buff State, and out here on the North Campus. What about them? And so they convinced the bishop to create Family 36. And I think that was just the smartest thing, because unless I'm mistaken, this may be the one place that survives it all. I mean, it may be the one place that survives it all. And we're doing more baptisms right here than they are in any other church in this diocese. We have more families coming in. And Pat's going to tell you how we started with this little group and where it's grown to. And Dan, I know one of the most important challenges for you, because and I shouldn't speak out of turn, but I know what they told him when they recruited him. They said, you're not going to have a lot of priests to help you. There aren't a lot of priests going to be there to help you. You're going to have to rely on the retired priests and people who want to do what we want them to do here. And I think that means that your job is going to even be bigger, because we're going to become, for as long as we're able, ministers. And I go to a church in Florida where 2 days a week they don't have a priest. Deacon comes out, they say all the prayers, they serve communion. The only things they can't do are consecrate the host, and they can't give the oil during last rites, but they can do all the other things. So many of you are Eucharistic ministers, and I promise you, if someday you can't find a priest to be here, we're all going to be here, and we're still going to partake of the body and blood of Jesus. Well, you got the fire in front of my favorite crucifix. That's not... Jesus is burning on the cross as I'm speaking, so...
There you go, Holy Spirit.
Thank you. See, I told you I'm a heretic. Thank you. I forgot about the Holy Spirit. Anyway, I think you now get the feel for why I wrote what I wrote. And as I told Dan, he's going to need all of you, all of us, and even the ones who aren't here, in order for him to be successful in his ministry going forward. And so not only do I want Pat to tell us how we got here, I want you to have some thoughts on where we're going, but then I hope you folks have some question, because there is a strong future for the Catholic Church. I mean, just think of the things that survived. It survived World War II, where we didn't exactly held our heads as high as we should have. It survived the days when whoever won the war got to name the Pope. That goes way back. And we're going to survive everything, because we're not going to survive. Jesus is going to survive everything, and we're just going to partake of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat first, if that's all right with you.
Well, thanks, Greg. It just gave me a lot to think about. Who picked you up at the airport?
You did.
Yeah. Anyway, a couple of things I want to say. There's so many things I could say. The first thing is this. When I was ordained 13 years, I was not happy. And I went to my dear friend, Father Peter Drilling. You all know Peter. Peter's been here sometimes. I was going to call him today. Anyway, I talked to Peter, and he said, Patrick, there's a vacancy in campus ministry. Why don't you go there? So I did. And that was in 1981. Wow, in 1981, before you were born.
But I am 13 years old.
Oh, good man. All right. Oh, terrific. So anyway, and so I was just, I'm young and naive and excited, and I went to Fredonia. The priest had been there for 100 years, wonderful man, Don Meeser. So I said, well, I better go over and meet people. And so I walked over to campus, and there were the bills, I think, were practicing, so the policemen were there. So I walked up to one of the policemen. I said, hi, my name is Father Pat Keleher, and I'm the new priest here at the Newman Center at the Fredonia State College. He said, oh, yeah, big deal. So I thought, listen, make when they give you sour things, make them sweet. So that was the first moment in my experience with campus ministry, and I said, I can only get better. And that was a transforming moment in my life. And you made me think about that today. So that's kind of what I tried to do. And so when I came to UB, I was welcomed the first day. I came to the barbecue in 88, and there was Carm Privatera, the Pope of the church. You know, Carm. Some of you remember Carm. He was the best, and Carm, and I was welcomed so much by a community like you that it enabled me to be a priest. I mean, and a priest that I said, well, here we go. So I did the best I could, and then our community grew. And at the time, the community grew because you know why the community grew. The community grew because the parishes around were led by people who didn't. I mean, you know, they're these big parishes. They send the wrong people there. They should send young, dynamic people there instead of old farts. You know, so we got a lot of people, and it was right on the bike path. I mean, come on, because all you do was turn on the water. I turned on the water switch, so it became where runners used to stop and get water. So the community grew. And then the first week I was there, I met the president. I made an appointment and met the president. The president at the time was Steve Sample, who became a very close friend of mine. Steve, I was at his inauguration at the University of Southern California. And so I reached out and I did all I could, and the community grew and the community grew. And then we moved on campus a lot. Oh, wow. We had mass at 10 o'clock at night in the Jane Keleher room, no relation. And it was filled. And I must tell you that, this is a little history. You don't mind, do you? You don't mind when I tell you this stuff. But anyway, so I invited Bishop Head out one time. Honest to God, he said mass in the room of the Jane Keleher room, which is across from the big performance hall. And honestly, he was so moved and impressed by that mass. It was Catholic Charities the next month. Every Catholic Charities talk was the work that's going on at the University of Buffalo. So it was really wonderful. So it's not that hard. I mean, I think it's not hard. I think it's not hard to follow Jesus. I mean, it's hard to follow Jesus because you have to die, but you have to die to yourself and live for others. But anyway, so then, well, you all did it. I mean, when I was I did kind of a prayer at the Trappist monastery down in Geneseo there, Pefard. And I came back. I think I called you, Greg. I called you and Dennis Black that day. Dennis Black was the vice president for student affairs. And I said, we have to build a center here. I went to a wake that afternoon in Lockport, and I said to my sister, many of you know my sister, I said, Sue, I think I'm going to propose building a center. Are you out of your mind? She said, you crazy? So anyway, she was herself. Anyway, and you know, we did it. Yay. We did it. And we did it, as Greg said, it's a functional building. It's really functional. And thanks to Joe Testa, who was on the what do you call it, board when you about building buildings, you have to go to the village. What do you call that? The zoning board. So for the zoning board, I told them it was a place of worship, so they didn't say anything. And for downtown zoning board at the Chancery, I told them it was a place of gathering. So they didn't fool around with any religious thing. So I managed to cage it. I caged it. You know, it was really God's the Holy Spirit's inspiration. It was I mean, it was not mine. And so we raised the money. We raised $3 million, and we built this place. And I think the ministry has grown and grown and grown and grown. What we can do. I always think campus ministry, I describe campus ministry as the church of the future 101. I want to get students in here, and doctoral students, and you know, Dennis Higgins, our good friend Dennis, who was a member of our community, he was a professor in the med school. we gathered students together, and he told the graduate students, he said, you're the same as we are. We're searching. You're searching. We're searching. And he managed to do a lot of ministry to, I think, graduate students and our campus ministers all these years. I was here so many years, but too many years maybe. But it really kind of grew, and the presence. And then we had mass at the student union, huh? Well, I mean, on Sundays, because we got so big, we moved to the student union. It was so there were hundreds of people there, and hundreds of students. And tell them about the Ash. Oh, you got this. You told me this story, Greg.
Pat's way too humble. I mean, some of us go way back. When he had at most 90 people squeezed into the chapel over there on where the cemetery is on the campus, and that 90 families has grown to 1,500 families. So that's not a bad deal. But one day he calls me, it was Ash Wednesday. He said, Greg, you got to get over here. I said, why? He said, we're having mass in the student union. And I said, I already went to mass this morning. He said, no, you got to get over here. I walked in, the auditorium in the student union was filled to capacity with students, teachers, and people like us. And he said, where else in America on a state secular campus is Catholicism this evident? And the truth of the matter is nowhere. It was right here, and in large measure because of the way you were with people. And it's just, it grew, and the things you've been able to do, not just for me. I mean, I could tell you stories that make me cry, and I don't cry that easy, and I'm not going to tell the one that does make me cry. But you've done, now, one more, but now, here's the thing. He wants to retire, but Dan needs you now, so we need you to come around a little bit.
All right. I am coming around in January for a few Sundays, so. And I will help you whenever I can, Dan. I've said no to a couple offers because I don't want to. I'm not a star. I don't want to overshadow you, but I'm just the guy sweeping up the horse paws, So no, I'm serious. I mean that with all my heart. It's not that hard. It's not that hard to, I shouldn't be so personal, but it's not, I don't wear my collar a lot, except every time I walked on campus, I had my collar. You're the only person who can walk on campus with a collar. Hi, Father. How many kids are there that their parents left the church? Our parents are sick and tired of the church. So I think, and this community, I think, I see Dick Klink over there. I remember Dick Klink was here one Wednesday night. There was a student, a pharmacy student who was here, who looked like a teenage Charles de Gaulle. Do you remember his name, Dick? No, anyway, I said, here's Dick Klink. He might be looking for a whatever you call it, a helper, and he was a pharmacy student. And I think you hired him, and I think that's 20 years. But and I remember Peter Poth. Remember Peter Poth, the famous Peter Poth. Peter Poth said, do you ever hear any kids that are accountants? Peter was at one point the CFO of Delaware North, right, Ed? He says we want to help students, and so many of all of us. I think that's what the Wednesday night thing is, not just a good meal, which is wonderful and generous, and everything about the Wednesday night dinner is God and grace and spirit and life and love and all that stuff, and all of you have been part of that. I think. You've been thinking about Jesus, but I was thinking I think of Newman a lot. I read a lot of Newman in my life, and the point is Newman once asked himself, what would you say to St. Paul? Would he believe in the Immaculate Conception? It's absurd that he would even think about that. And Newman said, explicitly No, because St. Paul didn't know to think about those kind of questions. But implicitly, but what he thought of Mary, and implicitly. And I think the implicit evolution is an interesting. Newman wrote his extraordinary conversion work an essay 500 pages long, an essay on the development of Christian doctrine, an essay. He wrote that 10 years before Darwin wrote his Origin of Species, and I think I see it growing and developing, and I think so. I was thinking. I agree with you, Greg. I've often agreed with you. So anyway, is that what's happening in the church is, I think of the Cluny. Some of you were at Caven's tours to France. Cluny, the abbot of Cluny in the early medieval period had more power than the Pope. What's there now? Rien, as they say, nothing. Well, there's a monastery there, but no, it's a ruin. But the church is here, and I think, I really think that we're the energy of the church. What was it? What's the famous anthropologist, Margaret Mead? What is her famous quote about the only way that change ever happens is because the energy of a few people? Is it something like that? Does anybody know that by heart? And that's the way it's always happened, is the energy of a few people can change the world. I really believe, thanks for asking me to do this, because it's really inspired me a lot. And I really deeply believe that that's really true. So anyway, we're here. I think we have the Spirit of Jesus here, explicitly and implicitly, because we don't know where we're going, but implicitly, God will reveal it to us through the Spirit. Don, thank you. Anyway, that's just all. I cannot enough. Okay.
All right.
It's not that hard.
And now for the challenge of the future, which is a huge challenge. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, I'll share a story. We had lunch together when Dan first got his assignment, and I'm a talker, as you probably have imagined. Well, I actually listened for 2 hours as Dan explained to me how he was recruited by Father Brian, of all people, who we wondered, is he supportive of this? Well, it turns out he's very supportive of this. I think the exposure Father Brian had to the Newman community and the campus ministry during those 6 months when we were in transition awakened him to the fact that he needed young, vibrant, enthusiastic leadership. And when he recruited Dan, he made it pretty clear, you got a big challenge ahead. And I'll tell you what, after 2 hours of listening to you, you're up to the task. So it's up to you.
Great. Thank you. A little bit about myself, for those who haven't heard me yet. It was 13 years ago that I was ordained, so starting campus ministry here in a sort of a similar place. I grew up in Orleans County, Holly and Kendall. Anybody ever been up there before? I was talking to a few folks, all right? And they each had their own little Catholic church, little country churches, and they shared a pastor all the way back from when I was growing up there. And so as an altar server in those days, I somehow had in my head that, if I was going to be a priest someday, it would be 2 little country churches. And after I was ordained, I had a couple years as an associate, 3 in one place, 3 in another. And then when I became pastor, it was 2 little country churches. I was like, God's good. I made it. I had that for 1 year. And then, of course, more responsibility gets piled on so quickly. The last place that I was at, we talk about Family 36 as kind of late to the party, in some ways, but so necessary. My number was lucky number 13. I was family 13. It was the only family in the diocese that was closed outright in the end. In my time there, I was asked to, although I had 2 associates, to cut the number of masses in half, and then to cut the number of locations in half. So we went really down in about 3/4 of what we were doing. And I had thought, as I was drawing that process to a close, although there was still so much to do, that I would be able to join another family and just be an associate for a little bit. And of course, that's not the way it works. They said, all right, you got to replace both Father Pat and Father Jack. Good luck, you know. So I was invited to come here by Father Brian, among others. And I've had an opportunity to do a bit of campus ministry in the past with Alfred State and Alfred University in the Southern Tier. But really honored to be here and to be able to be a priest here. You talked a lot, Greg, about like what would Jesus do? And I think that's got to be at the heart of what our mind is. I had an opportunity to go to the Holy Land a little while ago. We spent just 5 days over there, which is not very much time for all of the things you want to see in a place like that. And the most moving places were not the places that you might expect. If you go to see the tomb where they think Jesus was buried, has anybody been there before out of curiosity over in the Holy Land? Okay. Well, in the story we hear that it was cut out of the rock, but what they did later was they cut out the rest of the rock. So when you go into the church, it's just a stone box that is where Jesus was supposedly buried. And it doesn't feel, to me anyway, like a very, it's hard to imagine it as it was. The most moving place for me was the Mount where they think he gave the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. I had the opportunity to stand there on a hillside surrounded by a garden outside to do Mass, to look over the same lake that Jesus looked over, and I felt a lot closer to Jesus there than in any of the beautiful places that we were in. It was there that he connected with people. One of the commonest ways that he would connect with people, and sometimes this gets seen as connected to the Mass or the Eucharist, he'd eat with people. He'd have a meal together. And that's one of the things that I love so much about this space, is just how versatile it is, and how quickly you can turn from celebrating a very formal sacramental Eucharist here to just a community that is sharing a meal. Is that pizza? All right. all right. I won't keep you. He knew that we needed those formal, spiritual, sacramental moments, but we also just needed to be people with one another and meet one another's needs and feed one another. And that's really hard to do in some of the very traditional churches that I have been in. You could set up a little coffee in the back maybe or something like that. But I always wanted to be able to connect more closely the Eucharist that we celebrate with that meal, like the Last Supper that Jesus would share. And I feel like this is a place to do that. One more thing, I guess, as we go forward, there are indeed fewer and fewer priests. The numbers are going down. I actually had, while I was a seminarian, I had a priest tell me once, he said, Dan, don't do this. Get out, basically. His thought was that there's going to be so few priests in the future, not worth it. It struck me at the time that, like, how much worse would the problem be if everyone had that attitude, right? I'm here because of love. Love of Jesus, love of the community that's here trying to do what Jesus asked us to do, to love God and to love one another. So there's fewer and fewer priests, yes, fewer Catholics to some extent. I'm the oldest of 5. I'm the only one that still goes to a Catholic church. One just got going again with the Episcopalians. I'm excited about that. But that means that there's the number of priests are going down faster than the number of people that want to go to Mass. And that means that as the number of sites are closed and the number of Masses are reduced, you actually wind up with more and more people at each individual Mass, if that makes sense. So, to my mind, one of the challenges that we will have in the future of the church going forward is how do we break that up a bit? You know, I don't want everybody to be going to some large church where they're just a number. We have to find ways as a church where we can still love one another. And to do that, we have to know one another. One of the ways we do that, and Greg, you outlined some of the many amazing ministries that take place right here, is you do the work. You do the work with other people. You have something you share in common. You get to know them. You know their passions. You know their needs. And the church is made out of building blocks like that. It's not just showing up on Sunday and then leaving. It's the community that we are building. And you don't need a priest for that. I'm happy to be a part of that. But even as the number of priests decline and we're stretched thinner and thinner and bopping around, and I'm just this evening I was here earlier, and then I had to run down to Newman over at Buff State, and then I had to run back here, and then I ran out for a quick bite, and then I ran back here again. So we're all over the place. But the love that you share and the community that you build here endures. The love that you have found, the inspiration in Jesus, the ministry that you offer, that continues to invite people in. So I've seen a whole bunch of closures in this latest process that we have been going through. I don't see storm clouds ahead for this location here. I think this moment of crisis is behind us. There's two things that we have been asked to do in this year together. One is just to make sure that we're paying our bills, and we're on track to do that. You've been very supportive, so I thank you, and I appreciate the hard work that you have been doing here. But they also want to see that we're working together. The Newman Centers, St. Joe's, we've got a common mission, common focus, things that we can share with one another, retreats that we can do together, and then hopefully reach out and start to teach some other priests how to work with other colleges, secular colleges in the Diocese of Buffalo. And so rather than starting from scratch, we're just growing something that is already succeeding, sharing what we have learned. So again, I'm still quite new here, starting just in August, and there's a lot I have to learn, a lot going on here. But I want to thank you so much for your support, and even more so for your inspiration as people that take so seriously what would Jesus do.
Well, you can see we're in good hands, both sides of me, and we'll continue to be in good hands. You make a great point. When I was a kid, my mother said, "You're in church, stop talking to everybody." When you come here, the reason we have Newman time, besides you always being late, is it gives everybody...
Half an hour before.
I'm kidding. It gives everybody about 20 or 30 minutes to talk to each other. And then, at the end of Mass, the announcements take about 10 minutes. And you know why? Because there's like 10 projects that they're talking about, and everybody's doing something important when they leave here, not just when they're here. So you got a lot of good stuff to look forward to. And now I think it's important that we ask if you have any questions of any of us. And I was going to say, what do you think is the future of the Catholic Church? But whatever you choose to ask a question of any of the three of us, and we'll do our best to answer it, and then we'll eat some food and have some drink. Question? Come on. Don't be timid. Yes, sir.
Reactionary, let's deal with the current crisis. Are you seeing any, okay, here's our go forward? Dealing, and I understand there's a lot to deal with, but are they starting to shift more to how do we go
So, to summarize, I think diocese pretty reactionary at times, putting out fires from crisis to crisis. They've had some consultants, certainly, and one of the challenges that they have given us is to set up they want 6 pillars, groups of people that are focused on 6 categories of things, and one of the requirements for that is to establish more of a strategic plan. I've worked with some parishes that don't take that work seriously at all, but I think it's something that we need to focus on here. Where are we in a year? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Getting people together that can work on that. One of the things that I would like to have for the family as a whole that we don't quite have yet, let's just get through Christmas here, is a pastoral council for the family as a whole that can come together, express the needs and concerns, what are areas that are not being met or not being met well, and then to work on that plan going forward. For, I would say, the next year, the focus really is on these 3 locations coming together and helping each other out. You're trying to identify what the shortcomings are in each area. How do we help each other out? So we're trying to establish, for example, a common calendar of campus events and have campus ministers that could cover for each other on an evening if they needed to step out for some reason, and let our students get to know the different folks that are helping out on different campuses. So I'm not the bishop. Lord only knows what they're doing up there for strategic planning. I hope they are, that they've got a long-term vision. But it's certainly something that they have asked of us, and that's one way we can show we're taking this seriously, and we've got a plan for the future here as well. We want to be in it for the hall.
Can I answer that just a little less diplomatically? This is terrible to say, but I think they should be listening to what we tell them is the future. We're the future of the Catholic Church, and when they start listening to what really is going on, and not just here, other places as well, I think instead of them dictating, they'll learn that it comes from us, not from them. And I think that's what has to happen. So we just keep doing what we're doing. Now, it's hard when you're a priest. I think
Brian learned a bit from his time here.
Oh, I think Brian's learned a lot. Because I knew him before when he was just a simple priest. Then they made him into, unfortunately, a tough job. But I think you're absolutely right. I think he's learned a lot. But the question is, they have to learn from us what the future of the Catholic Church is.
Any questions? I have a mic. I'll hand it out. Please use a mic because this is being live streamed and they won't hear your question on television. And I also want to see that Josh popped his head in here. So Dr. Josh, please step forward and take a bow. Friday was the big day. He did his dissertation and he's now a doctor. Thank you. Any questions? I'll get you the mic.
About the accomplishments and what the Newman Center is all about. You remember, Father Dan, you were there, and a bunch of us were there at this. And somebody said to you, and this really has bothered me for the last month, somebody stood up and said, "You're not Father Pat." You recall it, right? And I'm embarrassed that somebody stood up and said that to you. All right, you're not Father Pat. I'm not my father, right? I'm not my father. She's not her mother. He's not his father. And you're not Father Pat. But from what I've heard over you over the last month, your heart's in the right place. And I want to thank Father Dan for having a heart in the right place. Nobody's Father Pat, and not any of us. And Father Pat's the only Father Pat, but you're Father Dan, and you're going to do a hell of a job for us. So, that being said, as I look around, as I come to Mass every week, and I see everybody in here with gray hair, and we're the same people. This is a hell of a community. But how do we get younger? We all have kids. And like you said, you're the only one that goes to Catholic Church. Now, between Peggy and we have 4 kids. Last night, we were at a concert at St. Stephen's on Grand Island where 2 of our grandchildren go. And my daughter very proudly said to me, "Dad, I went to church 3 times this month." It was a revelation, believe me. I thanked her, but that, she might go the next 3 months without going, and so the question is, as I look around the Mass, how can we get young people to come to Mass? That's the question.
Well, Pope Francis says, and I can't remember it exactly, but he says we don't live in a time of epochal change, but we live in a time of the change of the epoch. I think something like that. And so the language, I think of Massimo Fagioli when he was here. Some of you were at his talk. We asked him at lunch, somebody asked him, I didn't ask him, but what's the biggest problem in the church today? Is ministry. Ministry, it's the biggest problem. Why don't we have married priests? I mean, I could name probably every single person in this, as I look around them, every single one of you could be the priest here. I mean, men, women, and everything. I mean, so that's just part of the problem. And Aquinas's answer to why we couldn't have women priests was kind of a silly answer. It made no sense. It made no sense because they didn't have a place in society. We almost had a woman president, a place in society. We have Indira Gandhi ran the biggest country in the world. I mean, she was a woman. Yeah, and think of that. So anyway, Peter Drilling, my father, Peter Drilling, he was a careful thinker and a careful thinker. Patrick, there's no reason that we can't have women in the church as priests, So, so that's the first problem. The second one is an epical change, a change of epoch. Is that, and I think of Massimo Fagioli has a new book out about the universities in the United States. In the universities and theology in universities, Catholic universities. So I can't wait to read it. But anyway, when the bishops sort of dropped the theologians, what happened was the Napa Institute took them over. The Napa Institute is a conservative bunch of billionaires. They're very fine Catholics. They wouldn't belong to this community. Even though they make wonderful wine and beer. They're wonderful wine and beer, they're bushes and all that stuff. But anyway, so what happened? So anyway, enough about that. But we don't think about God the same. I always used to joke with Frank Gasparini, a professor in physics at the university, a good friend. I said, Frank, your work, and I said, first of all, you look like St. Francis. So I said, Frank, you're St. Francis on campus. But we don't have a crucifix in every classroom like they do at Canisius and Niagara. So we have people who don't believe in God and don't believe in the church, but the reason they don't believe in God is because they don't see God, and so we have to shift the paradigm so that people, and we have to find ourselves. I mean, we don't. You grew up in this high school and with Catholic high schools, and Bill went to Doherty and Jim went to Doherty. It was a different world. We have to find God, St. Ignatius, see God in all things, and we have to share that with our students. That's why it's like the future of the church 101. That's why I'm so glad we have these classes here. I'm so glad Josh was so helpful. But the world has changed, and we're part of it. And I'm really, anyway. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Let me just, if I could add, it's a really common thought, a really common concern. Pretty much everywhere I've been pastor, people say my kids aren't coming to church anymore. Usually now it's my grandkids aren't, coming to church anymore. And I've heard a lot of answers to that question, but normally what I'm looking for as I hear other people's answers, as I look nationally, and I'm looking for success, you know? Everybody's got advice. What works? That's not always easy to follow, but I think here you are seeing success. I mean, you're having a number of baptisms that puts every church in the diocese to shame. There's a lot of people that are coming here, that are hungry, that are looking. So when we compare ourselves to the past, it's not maybe where we have been, but when we look at other places that are struggling, I think here we're doing better than most. There's something here that is working. So I know a lot of you go to different places, you go to different churches, you see different situations and things like that, but I never want you to take for granted what's happening right here and how well that is working. I told this to Father Brian once. He was showing this graph, and if you've ever been to a diocesan meeting, you know all those graphs go in one direction. He says, oh, the number of baptisms are down. You know, the number of first communions are down. The number of confirmations are down. And he said, and the number of deaths are down. And I raised my hand and said, that's great. People aren't dying anymore. No. Funerals are down. We try to put a little humor in these things, but here, when you've got the number of baptisms that is happening here over and over and over again, that people are going out of their way to find this place, to find what's going on here, that's a lot to be proud of. And that's something I hope we can share with other people and say, hey, you want to know what works? Take a look at what Newman is doing.
Go ahead.
We've got 5 kids. I've got a boy and 4 girls. The girls don't attend church anymore. My son does. My daughter wanted to be a altar server. They said, I'm sorry, girls can't be altar servers. The girls are so turned off. The church has to be more inclusive of women. I think one of the major problems with the church is we're not including women as much as they should be included. They should be able to give homilies. They should be, well, they should be priests.
Why aren't they letting her be an altar server? That's ridiculous.
Only boys could be altar servers then.
Not anywhere I go. I wouldn't go there anymore. Wow. By the way, I always have a little different answer than the religious answer to your question. I hate to say it, but we live in a world where you got to give kids something to get their attention. And it's wrong. You know, it shouldn't have to be. But I tell you what, Wednesday night dinners is a perfect example. There's nights these folks serve 200 or close to 200 dinners. Why? You're giving them something, and it wouldn't hurt to bring a little more of what we're talking about tonight into their lives. I mean, I used to pray when I had an exam. Other than that, I didn't bother. But when I had an exam, I would ask for help. So, you know, maybe we have to think of a new way to approach the young people. Pat baptized all my grandchildren. I'll bet you they rarely show up at church. And they go when they need it. And we got to make them understand that they need it whether they know it or not. So if we give them $100 bills, we can fill this place on Sunday, believe me.
Greg, we'd like to thank you for getting our attention. And what an unbelievable presentation. Let's give him a round of applause. Now, everybody, the thing you really came for, which is the pizza and the beer, are over there. Please avail yourself of it. And I have something for you, sir. Thank you very much, Greg. Go to Libro's. It's a good place. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Gene, we're going to dinner. Not tonight.
My wife says the calamari there is the best in town. I have to-
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Father Pat,
Thanks, Jim.
unbelievable, buddy.
You're the best.
Thank you. You're the best.
Sold me, I don't know. You sold me a long time ago.
Oh, thank you.